What I really want to talk about today is the evolution of App Store optimization. And I think when we talk about the evolution of App Store optimization, it's really about how ASO is becoming more personalized with things like in-app events, with things like custom product pages, but also to some degree, how people need to start thinking about ASO beyond the download in terms of how they're optimizing their onboarding experience and how that's tying into what they're doing on the store listing. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I call the end of generalized marketing because of some of these new tools that Apple and Google are giving us and some of the key factors there. We're going to cover some opportunities that we've discovered with our partners and chat a little bit about how we track impact on that and some of the emerging trends I think that are in the space. So in terms of ending generalized marketing, you no longer have one store listing. And if you're not leveraging custom product pages to build store listings that are catered to each one of your features and audiences, you are at a disadvantage from a conversion standpoint from everyone else that is doing that. And as we know in the ASO space, your conversion rate determines your ranking. So now simply having a competitor running custom product pages can push you down in ranking if you're not considering how to do that. In-app events, also extremely important because when you think about the nature of how Apple presents their store today, if you have a user and that user already downloaded your app, and we know that there are hundreds of apps on most people's devices, they don't know how to find them. When a user uses Spotlight Search and goes back into the store, if you're not running an in-app event, you lose your screenshots, you lose all your creative real estate. And that's one of the reasons, to Nicole's point earlier, you start to see it becoming a really big re-engagement issue, an important tool for re-engagement. Of course, Google has custom store listings and promotional content. They do the same thing. I'm kind of an Apple geek going all the way back to the 80s. So if I use Apple references, I mean Google as well. No hard feelings to Android users. But similar issues at play on both sides. In terms of how we think about custom pages and store listing strategies. So, obviously you use them for different purposes. On the ASO side, we want to leverage them to really emphasize messaging and emphasizing messaging around a particular feature to an audience. And obviously, custom product pages, when you think of ASO, they don't impact as much on the organic side. You're testing them in Apple search ads, you're thinking of them for paid search or external channels. But what is important to keep in mind is that when you're leveraging custom product pages in search, you're really learning how to bring up your conversion rate in the search result. And the reason that's incredibly important on the organic side is Apple and Google actually measure your impression to download rate for each individual keyword. They're not looking at your store listing conversion rate when it comes to determining your ranking in the store. And so leveraging Apple search ads, even if it's purely for CPP testing and understanding how you might prioritize conversion for one feature or one audience over another is very, very important. It's also important from a down funnel perspective because at the end of the day, we all want to know which one of our features causes people to convert and monetize better or engage better with our app. Custom product pages are a good way to experiment with that and to acquire more of those users that are high value. And of course, down funnel, how do we bring them into the app in a way where they get the right onboarding experience and engage based on what they saw, based on how they came in. Next, in-app events and promotional content. So, I think when you think about an in-app event, a lot of people still think about it being, I have a new feature in my app or I have a new release and I want to promote it. But the way people need to think about it is, I have a storefront, and in that store window, what am I putting up there? If I'm a company that has a lot of content and media, I'm thinking about what book do I promote? What podcast do I promote? What music is timely? If I'm a company from a seasonal perspective, I'm thinking what is going on this season for my audience. Like if I'm a workout app, for example, I want to think about what's happening during kind of the Christmas holiday season or the season where people are making their New Year's resolutions, right? And really understanding what promotions do I need to run at that time to both re-engage my audience and also to pick up new users who might be browsing the store. And then, of course, how do we bring users into the app, down funnel, keep them interested and informed? A lot of people don't realize this, but, users in mobile, even though you tend to have a lot of drop off from a user acquisition standpoint when people come into the app, they still have the app on the phone and they're looking at the App Store as a place to discover new things that they want and kind of little app size bites. And so we like to encourage people to think of the App Store like a place where people discover and experience new things, not just as a transactional place where people download. So even when users download your app and they've been a user and maybe they've lapsed for a while, in-app events are a way to bring some of those users back into your app and re-engage them if they're browsing inside the store. One other thing that we learned that ties into traditional App Store optimization is that the text that you use for your title and in your in-app events actually does cause you to rank better for keywords. It's a new keyword field, if you will. So this is not a place to involve brand copywriting teams. This is a place to think about how do we leverage that text in a way that converts well, that's good for users, but also takes advantage of some of the keywords that we're targeting and expands our presence in the store. We've seen that this is as powerful as keywords that Apple might use when they write an article about you in the store. It's as powerful as your own app title. So it's something that you really need to consider from a targeting strategy, from a keyword strategy. So in terms of opportunities, there are a lot of statistics that people are throwing out there. I know that when you talk about in-app events and promotional content, Google's released some interesting data, 20% median increase across acquisitions, 60% increase across Explore acquisitions when you look at search versus Explore, just from running these kind of in-app events. They've announced 5% more re-engagement for 28-day active users. So when you look at kind of what's going on here, it's really that story I said earlier. People who are browsing the store to discover something interesting related to a topic they care about. It's almost like a black box internet now. And a lot of people talk about ASO and they think, oh, well, people just come in through my brand and that's where I get most of my acquisition. Well, the reality is that's not really reflective of how consumers are using the App Store today, especially if you're talking about millennials, especially if you're talking about Gen Z, people that are not browsing the internet looking for things on the web anymore. They're browsing their phone, and where do Apple and Google send you? They send you to the store to discover things. That's why deep linking has become so important as well. So when we look at opportunities for custom store listings, we look at them in a lot of different ways. And I tend to think about this from a standpoint of not just the audiences that we're targeting, not just the features of the app, but the unique experience based on the channels that users are coming through. My favorite example is we work with one of the big news organizations, one of the big cable news organizations in the United States. And we discovered, which doesn't surprise me, that custom product pages are actually really important when you're driving users to your app through a lifestyle news page versus a political news page versus a local news page, right? And thinking about how you get more, how you do more better from your traffic on the web that's very, very specific, or from your user acquisition that's very, very specific, is important. In addition to using custom product pages as a tool where you're A/B testing, as a tool where you're learning how to do conversion optimization within search, combined with Apple search ads and some of the tools that they give you. So think about how we assess these funnels, right? So I just have some examples here of use cases, but at the end of the day, it's not just something that we think about inside the app anymore. I feel like a lot of times when you think about app marketing, people are thinking performance-based user acquisition, or they're thinking just what goes on inside the store. I think the reality is that with personalization, it's become much more holistic. There are things that you can do from a digital marketing standpoint on the web and in other channels that will enhance the conversion into your mobile app. And everyone knows that's important because people monetize and engage better in the mobile app than they do a website. So how can we make that process more effective? How can we make that more effective with CPPs? Uninstall rates. We've seen people with in-app events going on where their uninstall rates actually go down if you look at a 30 or a 60-day period for a user cohort, because users who lapse go back into the store looking for similar things. They're just bored. They're looking for a different presentation, or they're looking for a slightly different twist on the solution. And then they see your in-app event and they come back to you because they realize you have what they're looking for. Maybe they didn't realize that before. Maybe it just wasn't emphasized in the right way. So it's important to leverage that to bring those users back, but also think of it like an A/B test, right? Maybe in your in-app event, you're prioritizing or describing that feature in a way that you didn't do in your screenshots. And if that gets better conversion and brings users back, that tells you some important data in terms of what you might experiment with for your next store listing A/B test. finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about down funnel. I think that App Store optimization for a long, long time really has lived in the land of keyword optimization and conversion optimization for a store listing. But the reality is, if you're really talking about acquisition, right, being your role in an organization, it really matters how many people register, right? This is why we have goals in terms of events inside the app and not just goals of getting another download. And so being able to understand, how do we customize that experience so if a user is coming in from a specific store listing, they get an onboarding flow that's related to that store listing. If we know one group of users coming in on a particular feature is more valuable, how do we A/B test that when we bring people into the app experience for the first time? I feel like there's a lot of tuning that people do from a product perspective in the apps, but I feel like the onboarding flow more and more is becoming an acquisition thing, right? Because we want to make sure people register and get to that next step. That's what we're being goaled on. And so there are ways to test A/B. There are ways to A/B test onboarding flows in the app with no code. Airship has a great product called AXP that we've started to use with our customers that does that. Literally, it's like doing a store listing test, but one step further into the app, and a marketer can control it, which is important. Leveraging custom journeys inside the app, right? If you know users coming in on a custom product page and those users are really valuable, how can we make sure that the way we're messaging our users carries the correct theme through so that we're bringing them back and being more effective, right? So we consider that part of app optimization, right? And that's becoming a bigger part of App Store optimization over time. And these custom experiences for users are really important. If I come in and I'm looking for podcasts, I want something that greets me in the app that says podcasts, not music, right? And so those things are really important. People aren't really doing that enough, but it makes a huge difference. And even when you think about A/B testing, right? Everybody here is familiar with A/B testing the store listing. Well, the 4 or 5 cards you present a new user when they download the app for the first time to introduce them to that experience are no different and no less important than the screenshots that you're A/B testing in terms of getting more users through that process and understanding why users might not go through that process. And there are some pretty awesome ways to A/B test that without involving your engineers building a new onboarding flow, which could take 6 months, right? You can do that much more rapidly today, which we're working with our customers on. It's part of what we think of as the next generation of ASO. Now, measurement's really important. Apple and Google have some good analytics they provide. We pull that in and add our own layer to it at Gummicube. But really understanding how are these CPPs and store listings encouraging users to download, getting data about retention and average proceeds per store listing, and understanding, well, which one is really making more money, and understanding which one is performing better versus your custom product page or versus your core product page, particularly when you're looking at Apple search ads and some of that A/B testing that you can do. And of course, I think that whenever you're talking about the analytics Apple and Google give you, there are always layers that you can get better when you look at kind of other sources of data and you layer them on top of each other. So, beyond the consoles, really understanding the differences between different events when they're live. So if you're running in-app events, right, understanding, was there a particular event that brought in more valuable users to me? What did the conversion look like inside my app? Really understanding what graphics have a higher conversion rate. I was having a conversation. I was in London earlier this week, and I was talking to some brands there. And a lot of people weren't running in-app events. Some people were running them, but they were just kind of putting, whatever graphic and letting their copywriters kind of go wild on what was there. And then they didn't realize why the next day they were ranking for the wrong keywords, or why Apple was finding them relevant for things that they didn't really want to be relevant for. And we said, oh, well, you ran that in-app event yesterday, so Apple kind of reweighted your relevancy a little bit, so your share of voice was lower on the keywords you cared about. So things like that do happen, and it's important to pay attention to them. So there's one other emerging trend I want to talk about. It's a popular topic for a lot of people, and that's AI, generative AI in particular. And I know that Google is introducing some features, to make writing your store listing easier. And a lot of people are thinking of how do we use ChatGPT to kind of do these things. I guess there's one point that I want to make, and that is if you're like, if an old school SEO person, kind of like I am pre-Gummicube, that Google is very, very good at detecting whether multiple web pages, or in this case, multiple store listings, are using content that looks and feels similar, right? And if content looks and feels similar to what other people have, you are less relevant. They disadvantage you. So to some extent, you can leverage something like ChatGPT or even Google's own tools from a generative AI standpoint to come up with different ideas about how you might position something. But it's very, very important that you write it in your own way, because if you happen to have sentences that are structured exactly the same as someone else's store listing, Google literally might make the decision of saying this app instead of that app, instead of both apps, because they think you're doing the same thing and it was written by the same person. So it's just important to keep that in mind. It's important to remember that, your app is fundamentally going to be different in terms of how it converts and how users view its features as being more or less important. And based on your own strengths, only you can start emphasizing those things. So don't just leave it up to the machine, write it yourself, leverage the machine to get ideas, but make sure that it still reflects the uniqueness of your app, both for the user as well as for Google and Apple's machine. So just to wrap things up, right? The App Store and Play Store have changed, right? This is about an era of ASO tied to personalization around features and audiences. It's about understanding your funnels and leveraging the new tools that Apple and Google give you to optimize those funnels and really tailoring that experience before and after the download, inside and outside of the app, right? At the end of the day, like I said earlier, if someone believes that podcasts are the most important features of your app, but 80% of your acquisitions are coming through a landing page that focuses on music, that's probably a pretty big reason a lot of people are dropping off, and you have to tie all of that together. You can run A/B testing through custom product pages and through a lot of other tools to prove what is more important as you make these changes, right? There are a lot of conversations that sometimes have to go on internally, and we can help you get a lot of data points on that. And of course, assess performance and use AI, but use it in a smart way, right? Don't let AI become the brand voice of your company. That's not going to benefit you, especially as Apple and Google get smarter about controlling content on store listings and figuring out whether you have something that's better or different than someone else. Thanks, y'all.